So that said, we'll now kind of get into the walkthrough of the map creation itself. I'm going to navigate to that link you see below and begin developing the Turner-Fairbanks map message for our west intersection. So hopefully this works. If I tab over, this is the landing page for our Connected Vehicle Services website. This ISD message creator is the particular tool we're going to be using today. ISD in this case is intersection situation data. It's a combination of hybrid map and SPAT for use at the safety pilot, but it is fully supported for development of just map messages, as we'll be demoing here. So I'm going to click View Tool to navigate to this page. And then up at this address box, I'm going to type in the address for our facility here at Turner-Fairbanks, and here it pops up. And you can see it zoomed right to our facility. I'm going to zoom in by clicking the zoom icon a couple times. And here we are zoomed in, and I'll go ahead and start creating the map message. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create what we call in our system the parent map. And we're going to do that by going to File, New Parent Map. And now we're in the parent map editing mode, as you can see by this parent map up at the top. The parent map is going to enable us to share data between several child maps if that's needed for the purposes of splitting up a map message to size or building several adjacent map messages that might maybe share a common reference datum or a geographic correction or something like that. So we can enter this data once and then share it between multiple child maps. So we'll go ahead and get this set up. We'll go down here to click the Builder tool. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop our reference point marker approximately in the center of our intersection. Normally, one might take some time to be pretty precise with some of these things, but for the purposes of expediency for today's demo, I'm not going to worry too much about exact positions and whatnot, just so we can make our time constraints. But we are going to just place this here. The intersection ID is automatically generated. All of these values are taken directly from the Bing map tiles, and I'm just going to enter a name for it. And then I'm going to say that it is a signalized intersection. Now, if we wanted to know more about this particular detail element, we could click this question mark icon here, and it'll pop up this dialog that shows us a little bit more about that particular element from the standard. So in this case, we've just entered the name, and now we're going to click Done, now that we're done editing this particular element. So that's in the center of our intersection. And then we're going to take this verified point marker, and we're going to place this verified point marker at some visible location on the map that we can see that has a known GPS coordinate, either from survey data or from high-resolution mapping or anything of that kind. And we'll be using this particular point to perform corrections between all the other points in the map message and this known point. So hopefully we can mitigate some of any of the error that might have crept in during the satellite mapping or the projection conversion and whatnot. Since we don't have that survey data offhand for this, I'm going to not edit these columns, but you could fill in these with your survey data, this verified latitude and verified longitude, as well as verified elevation, and that will perform that correction at map message encoding time. So we'll just click Done here, and that is all the elements we need to add to our parent map. This is the data that is shared between the children, is the center of the intersection, our reference point, and the known good verified latitude and longitude coordinates. So with this done, we're going to click File, Save. We're going to enter a revision number. This is our first revision, so we're going to hit 0. And I'm going to click Continue. And now it pops up a Do I want to save dialog, so I'm going to say yes. And then we're going to move on to creating our child map using this data. We'll do that by going to File, New Child Map. We've already saved it, so we're good to continue and delete any progress. So then we will follow the instructions to open the parent map that we just created, which should be under my downloads. Here we go. So now we can see we're in the child map editing mode, but you can see it's imported all of the data from the parent that we just entered. This data is not editable from the child's perspective, so it's locked. You're guaranteed consistency between all the children of the same parent map message. But we can still see it here for our reference and usage. So now that we're in the child map editing functionality, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw in all of our lanes and crosswalks, all of the geometry that we need to represent this map. Again, I'm not going to try to be too terribly precise here, but we'll make sure that everything's at least close enough. We try to draw from the stop bar down the center of the lane to about 1,000 feet away from the intersection is currently our practice. You click the lane tool down at the bottom left, which you can now see is green, and then wherever you want your lane to start, you click, and then you continue to click at all the additional points in the lane that you want the lane to continue to. When you're done with the lane, when you finish marking all of the space that you need it to take up, you double-click, and now you can see that that lane is colored in orange, and it has all of the points we inserted clearly marked. So I'll go ahead and do this for all of the lanes we have here. For the egress lanes, we like to mark from the stop bar. From the ingress lanes, we like to mark from the stop bar. From the egress lanes, we like to mark from the edge of the crosswalk associated with that lane. So now we have a second lane and a third lane. And then I'm just going to continue going around the intersection, adding as many points as I need to try and keep the line of the lane as close to the middle as my application might need. I'm going to continue marking here. And at any point in this process, if I make a mistake that I'm not too happy with, like let's say this particular point is a little bit too close to the other lane, I can go down to this Edit Lanes button here in the Lanes category, and I can start to click on these points, and I can move them around, or I can add new points in the middle of a lane, and so on and so forth. If I need to add additional precision or anything like that, I can always go back and edit these to match more closely to what I was hoping. And then when I'm done making my edits, I can click out of that Edit Lanes box, and we're back in normal mode. So then I can resume drawing lanes. And I'm just going to try and model this corner so that it stays about as close as it can, a little bit off. So for this particular one, this is one lane in the real world, but here I'm going to draw it as two lanes just to showcase some other features a little bit later. So I'm going to attempt to draw those in. And if we're a little bit off for the purpose of this, it's added one too many points. It doesn't matter too much. There we go. If we want to clean that up a little bit with the Edit tool, that's better. And then I'll just draw in the second lane for that particular approach. We're getting a little bit off here. Generally, our best attempt is to make sure that the lines never cross over the road edge. We're off here for the purpose of speed, but that would be our best recommendation. They should never cross the edge of the lane they're attempting to mark or the road edge. And finally, for this last lane here, this last vehicle lane we're going to mark, I'm just going to draw that in to about there. So we have all our vehicle lanes marked now, but we should also demarcate all the crosswalks that are in our particular intersection. So I'm going to start at this crosswalk and just pick a direction and mark them all. And we will set all of the data elements on all of these lanes later once we have them all drawn, but it's important to get our geometry marked down so that we're happy with the structure of everything before we get too attached to any of the particular elements. So now we have all of our lanes. Oh, missed one. Now that we have all of our lanes drawn in, we're going to go ahead and start drawing in the approaches. These approaches are just groups of lanes drawn with this Draw Approach tool over here that correspond to sets of ingress or egress lanes in the map message. So we start by, if we accidentally add a point like that, you can click this Delete tool down here in the toolbar and come up here and just click on the element you want to get rid of, and then it's gone from your geometry. So now that we're back in the Approach tool, I'm going to draw in a box around each approach like this. It's important that you only need to get just the head of the lane that you're trying to demarcate as that approach. You have to get the very point that you started drawing the lane from, whichever direction that is. So now that we have a box there, we can refine it a little bit with this Edit Approaches tool. So I'm going to click on this approach, select it, and then we can either move the center point by clicking the center red dot, or we can resize and rotate that by clicking the corner red dot. So I'm going to get that approximately aligned so it still holds the point I was looking for, and then I'm going to click out of the Approach tool and move on to the other elements that I am trying to insert. And we'll just draw in one for every lane. I'm not going to worry about rotating the rest of them since there's only one lane at each approach, except for that bottom lane, which I will get to. But in a normal use case, if you have multiple lanes in any given approach, you would want to make sure they're all grouped appropriately. And for this one, I will draw a box large enough and make sure to rotate it to fit. And there we go. Now we have all of our approaches. Oh, -1. Now we have all of our approaches drawn in. So that's all the geometry we'll need to mark for this simple intersection. We have the verified point, we have the reference point from the parent message, we have all of our vehicle lanes, we have all of our crosswalk lanes, and we now have all of our approaches filled in. The next step from here is for us to begin filling out the data elements we need to assign values to all of these geometric objects. But first, we're going to go ahead and make sure to save our work. We're going to come up here to this Files menu, and we're just going to click Save. It's going to ask us for a revision number. In this case, this is our first one, so we'll call it revision 0. We're just going to click Continue, and then we're going to save this GeoJSON file that contains our intersection ID and the child indicator. Now that we've saved our map message, if we ever wanted to load the same map message, we would go to Open Child Map. We would browse to that very same file we just downloaded. Child, here we go. And now we're back where we were. So we haven't lost any work. We want to make sure to do this frequently so that if we need to make any edits or if we need to go back to the previous version, we can do so. Now that we've got our geometry, let's start filling in the data we need. All of these items need to be assigned IDs, they need to be indexed, we need to configure them for whether or not they're egress or ingress lanes, so on and so forth. So we'll start from the bottom and work our way around, just assigning information to all of these lanes. We'll start with the vehicle lanes, and to configure this, we start by clicking the front node of the particular lane, the lane we started, or the node we started drawing that lane from, and that'll pop up this lane configuration dialog box. We can configure the lane attributes if there are any particular attributes we would like to set. We can configure the lane type, what it's shared with, its number, and the latitude and longitude of the initial node. as well as how much the lane changes width from the reference node. So we'll set this as a vehicle lane type. In this particular configuration, we're not going to say it's shared with anything, although we have plenty of options that we could combine it with if we wanted to. Same with the shared width options. And our lane number, we'll just select lane 1 for this first node we're going to configure. We'll get to some of these other tabs in this dialog later when we've finished configuring the rest of these other nodes, the rest of these other lanes, sorry. But for now, that's all that we needed to set for this particular lane. So now you see that this lane is numbered lane 1 in the diagram, and that shows on all the points in that lane. So we're just going to repeat this process going around for all of the other vehicle lanes in our system. And you can see that when we go to select lane ID 1 is no longer available as it's already been selected, so we can't misconfigure it in any way. We just can pick the next one and continue our way around the intersection. So we're going to repeat this process for all of our lanes here until we have them all marked. Then, once we have all these vehicle lanes marked, we can begin to configure the approaches and the pedestrian crosswalks in this intersection as well. Working around our configuration. Okay, so now we have all of our lanes, number 1 through 9, configured with their lane type as vehicle lanes, and we've given them all lane numbers. So the next thing we can do is we can begin to go ahead and do the same for our crosswalks. If you ever click on the non-first node of a lane, you'll begin to see this screen. That's just editing that particular point. All you have to do to get the right one is to click Done and just select the other end, which holds all of the data. In this case, we have a crosswalk, so we're going to select the crosswalk type. We could, again, select any number of type attributes for our crosswalk should we want to configure them. These are all defined here with descriptions. Same with shared width. We can do any of those. But for this case, we'll just give it a lane number and keep moving around our intersection. All right. Now, all of our lanes are numbered, numbers 1 through 13. We have them configured as vehicle or crosswalk types. And the only thing that remains to configure as far as numbers go are the approaches. So I'm going to, in a similar fashion, walk all of these and configure all the approaches. When you click an approach box, it's going to ask you for the type, whether it's ingress or egress. And it's also going to ask you for an ID. The approach IDs are separate from lane IDs, so we don't need to worry about deconflicting those. But they'll follow a similar pattern where we can't select previously used ones, so we won't run into any potential conflict issues. So we'll just begin to mark these all the way around as well. So this will be an ingress approach and approach ID 1. And then we'll just keep numbering our way around. This is an egress lane, and it will be 2. In this case, these approaches all have 1 lane in them, but that is not necessarily the case for the tool. As you can see in the bottom, we have one with 2, but you could have any number of lanes in a given approach. So that's something the tool is capable of handling with ease. All right, and here's our last approach to configure, number 9. Number 8. Okay, So now we have all of the basic data elements for all of our lanes, crosswalks, and approaches filled out. They're all numbered. They all have types. So this would be a good starting point now. We can begin to define how these lanes and crosswalks interact. Part of the standard enables us to use these connections or lane attributes tags to specify what maneuvers vehicles are allowed to perform at any given lane in our network here. You can do it either way. Both are valid. It depends more on your particular application and use case that you'll be using. And I'll show both for this one and then continue with the connections style. In this case, you would click the builder down here to bring up the options to drag on to your lane attributes field over here. So for lane number 1, which we're editing, you can go straight, and we'll just drop that over here. You can make a left turn. So that would be sufficient in this case. We can also set this information in a more granular way under the Connections tab. This allows us to specify lane-to-lane connection through the intersection. So in this case, we could say that lane 1 connects to lane 7 under a signal group ID, which will be determined by your particular traffic signal controller configuration. In this case, we'll just number it 1 for our sake. And then that would be performed with a left turn maneuver. We can delete these configurations if we want by clicking this trash can, or we can add more to continue adding granularity to our connections here. So it could also traverse over to lane 5, and that would be under a signal group ID. We'll number that 2 here, just for simplicity's sake. And that would be continuing straight. And now this lane is marked as connected to both lane 1 and lane 5. So if I click Done here, and then I close this out, we can see under, if we highlight this, it now shows connecting lines to those particular lanes. So if we continue around the map, we can keep filling all this in using the connections. So we'll say that this can connect to lane 5 under signal group 2. And then that would be continuing straight. And then this would also be able to connect to to lane 3 under signal group 2 with a right turn maneuver. And if we now click, after dismissing that, if we now click this, we can see those connections. So we'll just go ahead and fill these in for all the various connections in the map message. This would be continuing straight to lane 8. And then we could make a left turn into lane 9. And a right turn into lane 5. So we configure this on a lane-by-lane basis, just going around, making sure we have all of our data configured. Four can make a right turn to lane 5. To lane 5. It can continue straight to lane 7. Or it could make a left turn to lane 9. These signal group IDs are going to be configured again based on whatever the configuration of your traffic signal controller might be. Whichever one corresponds to allowing these particular maneuvers is going to want to be the signal group ID you use in your setup. We're going to want to primarily configure these for the ingress lanes in our network. So we'll skip 5 and go to 6. And at 6, we can go straight to lane 9. And we can turn right to lane 7. 4 since it's a separate approach. But again, it depends on your configuration. And you could make a left turn to lane 3. And then at lane 8, we'll just do the same thing. Make a right turn to lane 9. We'll make a keep straight to lane 3. And we will add one for lane 5 as a left turn. That one we already configured. That one we already configured. Oh, that's an egress lane that was configured, so I'll go ahead and just delete these. And then it looks like all of our connects to are configured. All right, so now that data is all complete. Oh, we missed a lane. My apologies. Missed the mid-block crossing over here. We'll mark that as a crosswalk, and we will number it now as number 14. All right, so now that we have all of that data elements configured, that's all we have for the data we need for our map message. If we go ahead and we save this, we'll call this revision 1, now that it's more complete. And then that is our complete and our completely configured map message. So I'm hopefully going to be able to switch back to my slide deck for a second to recap. There we go. So, in summary of the map message creation process, the first thing to do is to create a parent map message. You're going to want to put the reference point at the center of your intersection, the verified point at a known accurate location nearby, and then configure the intersection data for your intersection, the name, the speed limits, any other data elements that you might want to make sure are preserved in that parent map message. Then you're going to save that file to somewhere easy to access on your computer. The second step is to create your child map message. You're going to want to load the parent map message that you created in part 1. You're going to want to draw on your geometry, your vehicle lanes, group those lanes into approaches, and draw on your crosswalks. Then you're going to want to fill in your vehicle lane details, your approach details, and your crosswalk details. Then configure the connects to values for your signal groupings and your vehicle lanes and all of the legal maneuvers at each lane. And then, now that you've entered all the data, just make sure to save that GeoJSON file to your computer for usage later or for later reference. With that summary complete, I'd like to show